How do we know what's normal? Well, we know something is normal if we see or hear about other people experiencing similar things to us. In the world we live in, we usually rely on media to tell us what normal experiences are. From movies to TV to radio and podcasts to social media, we're looking for stories we can relate to, see ourselves in. Stories that give our own experiences meaning and perspective. So if 51% of the population has a uterus and 90% of menstruating people experience period pain, why do we almost never see period pain accurately portrayed or even included in the stories we consume?
What's happening to your body, we don't know, because we've never really studied the female body. Say it's all in my head, but the research is quite spotty. No, we've never really studied the female body. Dismissed. Try losing weight, you're just anxious. That's fine, that's cool, I'm not pissed. Just wait 10 years for a diagnosis. Psychosomatic, you're so dramatic. Hysterical, emotional, hormonal, erratic. Heart disease, chronic fatigue, depression and anxiety. Do you have pain? No, you don't, because we've never really studied the female body.
Welcome back to CRAMPED, the podcast where I've been trying to find answers to questions about my severe period pain, and then trying to understand why those answers are so hard to find. Now that I understand my period pain has been caused by endometriosis this whole time, a condition that 1 in 10 people with uteruses has, but takes an average of 7 to 10 years to be diagnosed, I have more and bigger questions. Like, why does it seem like no one knows about endometriosis? Why does it take us so long to realize that our severe period pain isn't normal? And why is it so hard to communicate clearly and effectively about the kind of pain I'm in? Over and over again, I keep coming back to the fact that there is basically just one word in our vocabulary to describe period pain: cramps. One word for an experience that can range from slightly uncomfortable to excruciating. There's that old chestnut that Inuit cultures have 50 different words for snow. And I don't know if that's actually true. It sounds like a racist thing from the 1800s. But it is always used to make the point that when something is nuanced and detailed and frequently talked about and important in your life, there's usually a lot of words that you can use to talk about it. There are even evolutionary theories about speech and language being so important to our survival that it literally shaped us as a species. It's kind of obvious how the ability to quickly and efficiently communicate detailed information about our environment would be good for the group's survival. Instead of just gesturing and grunting, we could say, "Hey everybody, I just saw a very big tiger about half a mile southeast. Let's quietly go north and keep an eye out." But it also helped our survival to be able to describe exactly what we were experiencing. When we were in pain, we could say exactly where it hurt and what kind of hurt it was and get help quickly. And the more language develops, the more words we have to describe nuances in our experience, like the difference between a sour stomach and heartburn and nausea and bloated. All words that describe different kinds of stomach aches, basically. But we know that they're different experiences when we hear those words. We know that heartburn is different from bloated. But if we only have one word for cramps, it means that despite how common period pain is, and despite the vastly different experiences within that, we don't talk about it enough to have different kinds of words and phrases to accurately communicate about all the different kinds of experiences someone might be going through. And it means I can't communicate clearly and efficiently about the kind of pain I'm in, which, to be dramatic but evolutionarily accurate, hurts my chances of survival. I can't remember ever seeing depictions of period pain, normal or severe, on TV or in movies when I was growing up. But to be fair, I did grow up on top of a mountain in rural Maine, and we only got 3 channels, and only 2 of them came in clearly. So I did a little digging to see if there was actually a bunch of stuff on TV that I just didn't see. And no, there's almost nothing out there that I could find on period pain. If you're looking for depictions of girls getting their periods for the first time, there is some variety. There's My Girl.
I'm hemorrhaging.
What do you mean you're hemorrhaging?
I don't need your help.
And famously, and very traumatically, we have Carrie, where Carrie gets her first period while showering after gym class, panics because she thinks she's dying, just like My Girl, and then she begs for help while the other girls in the locker room pelt her with tampons and pads while yelling, "Plug it up." Even the Queen's Gambit gets in on the first period trauma. And technically, I guess it does include cramps because she grabs her stomach before blood starts dripping down her leg. If you expand your search to any shows or movies that mention periods or portray them in any way, you can find a bit more. There's obviously the multiple episodes of the incredible show Broad City. I May Destroy You has an incredible scene about period sex, which everyone should go watch immediately. And in the 2011 rom-com No Strings Attached, Ashton Kutcher brings cupcakes and a period mix CD over to Natalie Portman's apartment while her and all her female roommates are synced up and having their period at the same time.
I told you not to come. It's not safe in here.
Oh, I understand what's going on. You're all on the same cycle. This is very exciting. Your uterine walls will be shedding for the next 3 to 5 days.
Nice memorization. Did you Google that?
I may have.
Which is nice, but it's also kind of tipping into the women are so hormonal and unreasonable when they have their periods genre. And if you want media that depicts that, you have a lot more to choose from. Like this one from 30 Rock.
Oh, my period! You're all fired!
Aw, come on, 30 Rock satire. Or is it? I don't even know anymore. But scenes and stories about or portraying period cramps? Very slim pickings. In fact, the only scene I could find that was actually about period cramps was this scene from 2001's Brace Face, Season 1, Episode 8. This is a whole scene about period cramps, and since it's literally the only one I could find, I'm just going to play pretty much the whole thing for you.
With Alden holding my hand, I felt nothing else could go wrong.
Are you okay?
I'm fine. It's just my stomach.
Maybe you should sit down.
I didn't know what was happening. One minute it was like we were in heaven. The next I was seriously worried about finding a toilet.
Do you want me to take you home?
I don't think anyone's home.
Well then,
Ow.
that's it. I'm calling 911.
It's okay. No, it's okay.
Help! I think my friend's having an appendicitis attack.
Don't worry. Sharon's going to be just fine. If you haven't had the cramps before, they can take you by surprise.
The cramps?
2001, the year this episode aired, was also the first time I got death cramps. God damn it, Mom, if only we had cable. Even though I didn't see this at the time, I'm so happy it was out there. Although, even though the show portrays how painful cramps can actually be, even to the point of sending her to the ER, the nurse still blows off her pain as just cramps. And the message is kind of that, hey, if your cramps are so bad that you can't stand up and they're mistaken for a burst appendix, you're just sort of a silly girl for not realizing that they were just cramps. Like at no point in the episode does anyone go, "Hey, you went to the ER for your cramps today? Maybe we should take you to the doctor to see if everything's okay, because that's not a normal amount of pain." But still, for a cartoon from 2001, pretty good. I never thought about it before, but now the lack of period pain storylines on TV and in movies is so weird. This is such a common experience for so many people, filled with anxiety and shame and the opportunity for sitcom-friendly misunderstandings and hijinks. It seems truly dumb that of all the experiences and situations TV shows and movies have mined for meaning and laughs, period pain has been left on the cutting room floor for the most part. So much of my formative understanding of basic life experiences came from movies and TV. Everything from what a breakup feels like and how to feel better after one, all the way to death. The Fox and the Hound, anyone? Bambi? Seeing how there was basically nothing out there about period pain, no wonder I felt totally alone and freakish when I started experiencing it. I wanted to talk about this with someone who understands how much the information we get from media affects our beliefs and experiences.
My name is Wendy Zuckerman. I'm a science journalist and host of the podcast Science Versus.
Now, Wendy doesn't actually experience severe period pain. Lucky. But she was so excited to tell me her period stories that I forgave her.
It was such a surprise to me that the first time I got my period, I thought I shat myself. It was like a brownish smear, and I was like, oh my God, did I just shot? And I was like, that's so, oh, gosh, that's embarrassing. And then it happened the next day again. And it took the next day for me to be like, wait a second, I couldn't have shot twice. Did I just get my period? I just remember that so clearly.
That's so funny. Do you remember how you got an idea of what a normal period was?
I remember hearing from pretty young age that some people at school got really painful periods. And I remember hearing that and thinking, oh, I wonder if I have that, but I have a really high pain tolerance. Which speaks more about my personality of how special maybe I'm a superhero.
Right.
Because as a kid, it's hard to imagine people having different experiences.
Yes, your frontal lobe is not fully developed.
So I guess I had a little bit of crampingness, just a little. And I was like, maybe that's what people are talking about. And then later, obviously realized, no, this is a completely different experience that some folks are having.
I asked Wendy if she remembers seeing any TV or movie scenes about periods or period pain when she was growing up.
I think for me, it was probably the ads about tampons and pads. In Australia, and I think it's in America too, they always used a blue liquid. They'd pour this blue liquid and they'd have two different pads and one would suck it up and one it would fall on the floor.
Yeah.
Or they would use these terrible analogies like milk spilling or something like that. It was always very mysterious.
Right.
I remember the Carrie scene because I must have seen that movie in like high school, I guess, that crazy scene where they're all yelling at her, plug it up, plug it up. Watching it as an adult, you're just like, oh, that poor kid.
The fact that this traumatic, cruel scene is one of the easiest depictions of periods in a movie for anyone to remember is really telling. If there are so few depictions of periods out there, it really matters that the one most people think of is so terrifying and full of shame. I told Wendy about a survey I'd found from a company called Essity. In 2017, they surveyed over 10,000 people ages 13 to 50 across the globe and found that 37% of participants had never seen a reference to periods in film, TV, or fiction. I asked her if that number sounded right to her.
Yeah, I mean, if we have to reach back to the 60s for our Carrie references,
right,
even if it's had a remake, Friends feels like maybe they threw a tampon across the room at one point. I don't know.
You know what's crazy? They did so many seasons, and it's all about people in their 20s, half of whom are women. But I didn't find any documented references to periods until Monica starts tracking her ovulation when they're trying to get pregnant.
Right.
And it's like, oh my God, to totally skip periods in the lives of these 20-somethings and go straight to like, it only matters if you're trying to get pregnant.
I mean, clearly it was written by men or men were the lead writers.
I looked this up after I talked to Wendy, and actually one of the co-creators and lead writers of Friends was a woman, Marta Kaufman, who went on to co-create Grace and Frankie. So the issue wasn't that there wasn't a woman in the writer's room. It was probably just too much to ask of a sitcom in that era. Or most eras, I guess. So to invoke another 90s NBC sitcom, what's the deal with the lack of period pain representation on screen? Sorry for doing that. To understand this better, I called up an expert in on-screen representation.
I'm Madeline DiNono, and I have the privilege of serving as the president and CEO of the Gina Davis Institute, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year and was founded by two-time Academy Award-winning actor Gina Davis.
The story goes that Gina Davis was watching TV with her young daughter and realized that barely any of the characters she was seeing in kids' shows were female. To quote Gina Davis herself in a Variety feature from 2017, "There were very few female characters in these series and films for kids. Whenever I'd bring up this point to producers or studio executives, every single one of them would say, 'No, that's been fixed, and we helped fix it.' And then they would name a movie with one single female character in it. One. A vast majority of the people making these shows are unaware that there are so few female characters made for kids." The Institute started by focusing on the representation of girls and women in kids' shows, but quickly expanded. And did they find a discrepancy?
At that time, we found that there was about a 3-to-1 ratio of male characters to female characters. And then when you look at the entirety of a cast, we found that it was upwards of a 5-to-1 ratio. And then the call to action was really about taking this research and bringing it directly to leading content creators, studios, networks, etc., to share with them our findings.
Why does it matter to be able to see all of these different people and experiences on screen?
What happens in the world of make-believe has real-world impact, and media has the power to shape societal attitudes, normalize issues, topics.
I know this is much broader than representations of period pain, but if you don't even have female characters on screen, it's pretty hard to have representation of period pain. And of course, it's not just female characters that can get period pain, but that's a whole other subject of representation. And it's not just nice to have more female characters. The impact of having really good female main characters is life-changing.
We had the privilege of working with 20th Century on a study called #Scully Effect. And Scully was the wonderful character played by the amazing Gillian Anderson on The X-Files. And they wanted to prove out this theory that the character of Scully indeed influenced women and girls who were old enough to watch the show to pursue STEM education and careers. And so we interviewed thousands of women and girls, and we found that 63% of the women working in STEM were largely influenced by that character. And the reasons that they cited were that she used her brain, her logic for problem solving, and that she didn't need to be saved. She could save herself. And when you think about language and the power of media, we weren't even able to advertise anything about menstruation until 1972. And it wasn't until 1985 where Courtney Cox, during a Tampax commercial, actually used the word period. That's kind of like not that long ago.
Yep.
Does your life change once a month because of your period? Still using pads? Let me tell it to you straight. Tampax can change the way you feel about your period.
It's so weird that Friends came up earlier as a show that was a missed opportunity for period representation, and then here's Courtney Cox, years before Friends, making period representation history. I asked Madeline how she thinks the lack of period pain representation in media affects people who menstruate.
Menstruation has always been dramatized with hysteria, and with that, the stigmas and disgust and fear and shame. And when you bump this up to a global perspective, it's very dangerous. You have many girls who don't go to school, who are kept at home because of this, and they don't have access to resources. So it's more than just being stigmatized or discriminated in popular content. We still have a long way to go in terms of raising the awareness, sparking conversations, and challenging these taboos related to periods.
How do we get more stories about period pain and menstruation and just women's stories in general? Like, how do we get there?
Well, we've always taken a data-driven approach to our advocacy. And we believe that having data and the facts is a great way of having a meeting of the minds and a conversation it's important to understand the frequency of a storyline around periods. What is that depiction? Is it positive? Is it negative? Are men serving as allies? Or are they accusing women of being irrational? I think it's important to look at all of that, which is what we would do. And then we would look at, is it something that we only see happening to white women? Once we do have that data, we will make sure that the study is available for the public, and then we will socialize it among our supporters, our allies, studios, networks, content creators, streaming platforms, so that they can have that in mind when they are developing storylines. And then we will measure what has been the impact. Has there been a change? Are they aware of this?
You mentioned the Gina Davis Institute is going to soon be collecting data specifically about menstruation and its representation on screen.
Well, it hasn't been funded yet, so keep your fingers crossed. If any of your listeners are interested in funding any of our studies, we'd be happy to speak with them.
Just a real bummer to hear that menstruation representation study hasn't been funded yet. Any listeners with a lot of money want to give it to them? Actually, wait, you know what? Listeners with money, come talk to me first about Cramped Season 2 before I send you over to the Gina Davis Institute. Thank you. Anytime you want to change something, information gathering is the essential first step. I'm so glad that the Gina Davis Institute is pushing to gather data on-screen menstruation representation. The suspicion that I've been having, though, informed by what I've learned so far working on this podcast, is that simply providing the accurate data on how unrepresented periods are on screen may not move the needle against so much stigma and shame. And that's not necessarily the Institute's job. They're working on one link in the chain, accurate data of what the landscape looks like now. But who picks that up and runs with it? Who changes people's perceptions? We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk more with Wendy Zuckerman, host of the podcast Science Versus, about how she presents scientific data to people to hopefully change the way they think about certain topics in women's health.
'Cause we never really studied the female body.
Welcome back to Cramped. We've talked so far about why representation of women and periods on screen is so important, and how the Gina Davis Institute gathers data on how much representation is actually happening. I'm interested in the next step. How do we use scientific data to change people's perceptions and opinions about these topics? And to understand that, we're hopping over to a totally different kind of media, podcasts. Heard of them? Wendy Zuckerman hosts the long-running and very popular podcast Science Versus, where each episode she and her team take an idea that's having a moment and see if the science backs it up or not. I saw on Wikipedia that you started the podcast because you read a headline about Gwyneth Paltrow telling women that they needed to do vaginal steaming. Is that true?
That is true. That is true. I was asked by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation to pitch a science podcast, and it just so happened that week, Gwyneth Paltrow had started suggesting women steam clean their vaginas. And I was so shocked and horrified, and that people were taking it seriously as well. Do you need to do it? It wasn't just this joke.
Right.
So I was so horrified by that I thought, oh, this should be a podcast, and we should use humor and science to really test these things that people are saying online. But we'd never actually done that episode, you know. Be very short. Don't.
Right.
It really did speak to the fact that we weren't talking about it, created this vacuum.
Yes.
For steam cleaning as a potential option, you know? Right. Whereas in other areas, you just feel like that's insane.
Just this past season, I counted 5 episodes that Science Versus did that were specifically on women's health topics. Episodes on the pill, menopause, abortion pills, hormone balancing, and the evolution of vaginal weaponry in the animal kingdom, which was my personal favorite if I had to choose. I asked Wendy if there was a specific reason that this past season of the show had so many more women's health topics than other seasons.
with this sort of greater acknowledgement that women and folks with vaginas having been sidelined by the medical community for a long time. I mean, everyone will have a story of going to the doctor and them saying, it's just stress, it's just stress. And you're like, no, there's something wrong with my body. Please do a test. Or just the story of those going through menopause and not getting proper treatment and proper care. And so there's more acknowledgement of that, which is so, so awesome and relevant. But along with the acknowledgement, the internet being as it is, there is also this other story that has come along, but I have the solution. Your doctor doesn't care about you. The medical establishment doesn't care about you. But you know who cares about you? Me. Me and my brand, me and my products. And you hear it from doctors. Doctors are some of the worst offenders that I see online and some of the most popular, that the rest of the medical establishment doesn't care about you, but I do. And they make these huge followings with these huge promises of all the solutions that they have because it's such an appealing story to so many of us who have been sidelined by doctors.
Right.
And so we at Science Versus have noticed a rise in this. And as a result, there's more to Versus, so to speak. There's more episodes to do. So with hormone balancing, which you see it, you got a penis, you got a vagina, men, women, however you identify, people are loving this idea of like, you can tweak your hormones, you can be happier. And if you do these things to tweak your hormones, that'll fix you. That'll fix your period pain. That'll fix everything. And menopause, huge in this kind of space. And so I think as that narrative has gotten stronger and stronger, we've just seen so many more myths or semi-myths, things to be debunking. And I think that's probably what we're sort of responding to. It's been sad and frustrating to see, but then I guess I got my work cut out for me.
I have found it so hard at times to find reputable scientific studies about some of these questions that I have. Did you find that you were having more trouble finding the solid science on some of these questions you were asking compared to other topics?
Yeah, so interestingly, with some very basic anatomy episodes, I'm thinking the G-spot, we have an episode this season on squirting. And there are some very basic anatomy questions that we have had that science has not answered. And that is where I see gaping holes. I'm like, are you kidding me? We don't have a good handle on what the quote-unquote female prostate is.
Right.
Scientific papers coming out this year that have looked in this area around the urethra. What is there? And I'm like, It's 2025. You're asking, what is that? This is 18th, 17th, 16th century anatomy. And yes, we do have studies from back then, but they're all over the shop.
Yeah.
So that is where I really am quite shocked around how do we not know this?
Did you get any different kinds of feedback or pushback on these episodes than you normally get doing your episodes on Science Versus?
I think sometimes people have really bought into the story they see online. So I think a really clear example of that is with menopause. And there's this really popular line that you see that folks have suffered through menopause needlessly, and there is some truth to that, but that all they need is hormone replacement therapy and everything would be cured. But the reason they're not getting it is because of bad science and bad scientists and bad medical establishment. Very compelling story.
Right.
The cure is here. Science is the bad guy. And we sort of really tried to break that down, tell you these are the parts of that story that is true, these are the parts that are not true. No hormone replacement therapy is not a miracle drug. Nothing is a miracle drug. And I think people had just bought into the story so much they couldn't break away from it. I think some people were like, thank you so much. This totally rings true for me. The hormones weren't that helpful. But others who were like, no. And that's fine. That's fine. I think our job is just to put the information out there that we think is accurate. And you hope that at least next time they see a video telling that same story, they might go, maybe I'm in a bubble. Maybe this isn't exactly right. And maybe when they are going through their menopausal symptoms, maybe they'll wonder what is right for me. And maybe hormone therapy is right for them, but maybe it's not.
I asked Wendy if there's a certain kind of listener that's drawn to this kind of scientific debunking or analysis, and if she's reaching the people she wants to reach with this information.
Definitely this concern that I think a lot of people in media have right now is that you're just preaching to the choir. As with any show that's been going for a long time, you find your audience, which is awesome, and people who want facts and want science. But as a result, you also lose people who don't. And those are the people that you actually desperately want to be talking to.
Right.
And so I think, as has been commented on many times before, this idea that science is now part of a left-wing conspiracy because a lot, not all the time, it's really important to note, in which I point out to listeners who say, every time you do a political episode, you're always on the side of the left. And it's you just say, well, what are you talking about? Because, when it comes to organic food, which you might say is some left hippie idea, I think we were quite even-handed around whether it's worth your money or not. But if you're talking about vaccines, how can you say that we're part of a left-wing agenda to just look at the science and say, yeah, you need a measles vaccine? Yes, you do. I think it's tricky. As everything has become more politicized, it has definitely made it harder to share facts.
Yeah.
But I think you just got to keep trying. You just got to keep putting stuff out there and you hope that you get some crossover.
I asked Wendy how her experience of talking about these stigmatized subjects, especially around bodies and sexuality, on social media has been different than talking about them on the podcast.
With social media, and particularly TikTok, the censorship is pretty extreme. The shadow banning in particular. I've been picked up for a few different videos. One was about the male G-spot, where I tried to be pretty scientific in my language, but at some point you do just have to say anus.
And they don't like that. Well, at least that's censoring male health.
And everyone's got an anus.
Right.
But vagina is definitely something I have to be really careful about. I whisper it, or you use different emojis, which feels gross. When you're giving factual information, and the whole point, or the sort of B story of what we do. The A story is here's some information. The B story is let's just talk about our bodies and not feel shame around them, to then have to whisper vagina. It's exemplifying this whole problem.
Because it's reinforcing it.
It's reinforcing.
Yeah.
Why am I whispering vagina? They say sort of 3 strikes and you're out. And I've had 2 strikes on TikTok or something. I don't really know. So I do think that's getting in the way, that this content could be out there. But for all I know, words like blood, period, you could probably get away with, but who knows what the algorithm is pushing down.
Right. You might remember in our episode about getting sucked into hormone balancing TikTok, I talked about how hard it was to find content on social media about period pain and cramps. That looking for that content is what got the algorithm serving me all that hormone balancing stuff in the first place. So why isn't there more content on social media about cramps? If there's one thing I know, it's that the internet is a vast, unending fountain of content. It can't all be shadow banned. So to find out why period pain content is conspicuously absent from social media, I brought in an expert. Taylor Lorenz is a technology and culture journalist who has written for The Washington Post, The New York Times, and Business Insider. She literally wrote the book on the social history of the internet. It's called Extremely Online. So if there's anyone who can answer this question for me, it's Taylor. Why isn't there more period pain content on TikTok and Instagram?
Oh my gosh, it's such a good question. Number one, I think there's a lot of sort of social shame around talking about it. Also, the platforms generally diminish that sort of content in the feed. So if there's somebody talking about, bodily functions, especially women's reproductive system, that's often categorized as political content and downranked on platforms like Instagram.
What? Content about women's reproductive health is categorized as political content on social media sites? I may not be the most online, but I did not know that.
It's hard to get an audience for it because I think people are nervous to share it. So much of what performs well on social media is stuff that's amplified by other users. And I think, again, it sort of goes back to that sort of social stigma and the fact that it's not getting a lot of feed distribution. People just don't share it as much.
I think I had a very naive way of thinking of it, of like, okay, legacy entertainment, the executives aren't greenlighting stories with period pain in them or stories where periods are considered just part of life. But on social media, we make a big deal out of people who don't wash their legs when they shower. Period pain is experienced by 90% of menstruating people. You would think that that's one of those things that people will just latch onto and make content about, and because it's so relatable. And it's crazy to me that the stigma is so severe that it works even on something like social media.
Yeah, I think that the stigma is strong and just the way the algorithms sort against it. Like there is a lot of algorithmic pressure against it, again, because it is broadly classified as political. Discussions of periods are also discussions of reproductive justice or LGBTQ rights and all these things that are downranked. We know Meta specifically works to hide this type of content. So it's just very hard, I think, for it to get any sort of traction.
Is there anything that we can do to change that?
I think speaking up about it, normalizing it, the social stigma really does play a role. And I think that the more women speak up about it and anyone experiencing these issues talks about it online, the more sort of normalized it will become. And I think just normalizing bodily functions generally is a good thing. These are like human bodies. And so often online, we see these idealized versions of bodies, right? Where like they're never in pain, they're never struggling, no one's ever suffering. And I think that's obviously not realistic.
How much of it do you think is the algorithm specifically like shutting down that kind of content or not sharing it? And how much of it do you think is people just not watching it because of the stigma around it?
I think it's a sort of a vicious feedback loop because the algorithms are not promoting it. The audience for this content is inherently artificially restricted by platforms like Meta. And then on top of that, people are nervous to engage with it or share it or like it publicly because maybe they feel embarrassed or they feel that sort of social shame around it. So then, of course, it doesn't get more of the algorithmic reach and it just kind of feeds on itself.
Do you get period pain?
Oh my God, I get the worst period pain. I actually think it should be illegal for me to work when I'm on my period because I probably have like endometriosis or something. I've never even gotten checked, but it's horrible. And I have migraines too. So I'm like basically like screaming in pain for like 5 days a month.
Oh God, I'm so sorry. And migraines is like the one period symptom that I've never experienced. And I can't imagine being a tech reporter and working in tech and having to be on your computer for days when you are having those symptoms. That sucks and I'm sorry.
I will say I finally found a drug that worked. I took it for about 6 months. It changed my life completely. It was so amazing. And then my insurance company decided to deny it, and it's $1,600 a month now. So I just don't take it, and I suffer through it every single month.
Jesus. Okay, there is so much to be pissed off about here. The fact that platforms like Meta are tagging women's health information as political. I assume they are not tagging male health information as political. The fact that I booked Taylor as a guest expert based on her vast knowledge of online creator culture, and she just happens to also struggle with severe period pain, and that her insurance stopped covering the one drug that helped it. Also, the fact that I have chosen to bet my entire career on making an indie podcast on a topic that algorithms will suppress and that people avoid talking about. Good stuff. After talking with these 3 experts about these 3 different areas of media and understanding more fully why there's almost nothing out there about period pain in either fiction or nonfiction, I do have hope about one thing. All the people deciding what kind of media gets made and what gets shown to people, at the end of the day, they're trying to do what they think people want. They want to make money by having a lot of people watch or listen or consume the media they make or platform. What they think we want right now is to not hear about periods and period pain. So they're not making it or not pushing it forward. Maybe this is naive and simplistic again, but it seems to me that if enough of us were loud enough about wanting period content, if enough of us watched and listened and consumed the media that is out there on periods and period pain already, we could shift the direction of this pressure. And this has nothing to do with the fact that I have a podcast about period pain. We've been talking mostly about why it matters for people with period pain, especially young people, to be able to see representations of normal period pain and not normal period pain. With more depictions of this experience, less people will accept the dismissal from their doctors, the normalization from family members, and the pressure to not talk about it at all. But it also really matters that people who don't experience menstruation or period pain, that they see depictions of it. Can you imagine how different your experience as a person with severe period pain would be if everyone around you had seen movies where a main character got horrible period pain and had to deal with it every month? If you could say, I get horrible cramps like the person in that movie, to your boss, and they would immediately understand what you were going through. If you went on a date with someone who mentions that they love a certain TV show, and that show happens to have a character who is navigating getting a diagnosis for their severe period pain, and you can share with them that you have had a very similar experience. I don't know, I'm not a screenwriter, so I'm sure there's more interesting ways to do this. But if there were enough of those stories, enough coverage on podcasts, and enough people sharing their perspective and their personal experiences with this on social media, it would be normal to hear about it. It would be normal to engage with it. And it would be normal to talk about your own experiences, whether they were similar or different. I do think that world is possible. And I think we can start to make a difference just by noticing how few of those stories are out there and talking about it. Next week, for our last episode of the season, I'll tell you exactly how much money I have spent so far getting a diagnosis and trying treatments for my period pain and endometriosis. We'll also talk to a biological anthropologist about why menstruation even happens and the surprising advantages it might have. And I throw a little period party. Cramped is hosted and created by me, Kate Helen Downey. Kelsey DiLanzo is our editorial producer. Sound design and mixing is by Kelly Kramarik at Maven Post Media. Our associate producer is Katelyn Sabater. Cramped's incredible theme song is written and performed by Faraday. Our podcast art was created by Nicholas Scheppard. This podcast is supported by the Simons Foundation's Science, Society, and Culture Initiative. Fiscal sponsorship for Cramped is provided by the Arkansas Podcast Collaborative. Special thanks to Mia Lobel, Yvette Modenow, and Matthew Starr. You can read the representation data that the Gina Davis Institute gathers firsthand at ginadavisinstitute.org. Listen to Wendy Zuckerman host Science Versus anywhere you get your podcasts, and find her on TikTok at Wendy Zuckerman, at least until she gets her third strike, and on Instagram at Science Versus. You can find Taylor Lorenz on socials at Taylor Lorenz, and subscribe to her newsletter, User Mag, to read her tech journalism. If you want to join a community of real people talking about their period pain and sharing information, email crampedpodcast@gmail.com to get a link to our Discord. And if you, like me, were intimidated by Discord, don't be. It's basically Slack. If this podcast has been useful or helpful to you, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave us a review. We are an independent podcast, and taking just a minute to rate and review, it genuinely helps other people find us who might need this information.
What's happening to your body? We don't know, because we've never really studied the female.